Everyone, back again. Here to talk about scenes 3 and 4 of Act 2 of Romeo and Juliet. So, Friar Lawrence is, he's a friar, which is a religious man, and he is also an apothecary. And what an apothecary is someone who gathers herbs and they know what plants are, poisonous, what plants are good for medicines, how to mix different, plants together to make different kinds of medicines. And basically, sort of the old, now we can go to CVS and get, aspirin or whatever, but they didn't have that back then. And so you would get some sort of herb mixed into a paste or into like a little, liquid solution. And if you had a headache, you might take a little bit of that. If you had, some sort of if you had malaria, right, they had things that you could do for that. And so depending on what you had for a sickness, you would go to the apothecary and get medicines. And so we see Friar Lawrence in his garden, and he's looking at the different plants, and he's walking around, and he's talking about them all. And he talks about some that are very, very helpful, right? They're helpful. If you're sick, they can make you better. And then he talks about some that are very, very poisonous, and they have death in them, right? If you took just the tiniest bit of that plant, you would die. And then he talks about other plants, some of them, where if you take a little bit, it can be helpful, but if you take a lot, it could kill you. And so, there are all sorts of different kinds of plants. And this is one of the things that talks about, we have this idea of good and bad, who's good and who is bad. A lot of times we're looking at, if we watch action movies or something, there's a clear good guy and there's a clear bad guy, and we have to fight against the bad guys and we have to succeed. But, in real life, it's not always so cut and dry. And so we have this feud between the Capulets and the Montagues. Are either of them bad guys? Are they both good guys? We don't really know, right? We only know some of the members of each family, but we know Juliet's parents, and they seem to be pretty good people, and Romeo and Juliet themselves seem to be pretty good people. Tybalt seems to be kind of a bad guy. He just seems to be violent and bitter and angry. But Benvolio and Mercutio seem like normal, young men who are sort of happy. They like their friends. They want to go to parties. They don't want to fight, right? And so we have different points of view. And, there's no clear bad guy and clear good guy in this particular story. And so I think that's one of the things that we have here with the friar coming in and talking about these different plants, where sometimes, the same plant could be good or bad depending on the situation. And so that, is one of the ideas that we have there. So Romeo shows up, of course, to talk to the friar and get some advice and ask him for help. And the friar, when he finds out that Romeo is there to talk about Juliet, he says, wait, what happened to Rosaline? And Romeo's like, oh yeah, no, I don't love her anymore. And the friar's like, this is ridiculous, right? You're so fickle. Fickle means like you don't, you change your mind really easily. And so he's like, this is absurd. And he even, brings into question whether or not Romeo liked Rosaline in the first place, right? He's like, I don't think you really loved her. You just doted on her, which is sort of what we would say would be like infatuated. And so, Romeo says, well, anyway, I want to marry Juliet. And the friar is like, well, it seems very hasty to me, but it might be a good idea. And of course, the friar is thinking that not only, will Romeo then hopefully be happy, but he's thinking maybe this marriage between Romeo and Juliet might be a way to stop the feud between the two families. And so, that would be something that he would really, as a religious man, would really be happy about. He, a religious man would want peace, to stop fighting, to stop killing. And so if he can bring these two families together through this marriage, that's something that he thinks is worthwhile. Now in scene 4, we see Romeo with his friends again, and Mercutio again is sort of joking around. And earlier in Act 1, Romeo had gotten sort of annoyed with Mercutio when he was joking around and sort of brushed him off. But here Romeo gives it right back, right? They go back and forth. They're sort of making puns and teasing each other. And of course, we can say, well, Romeo's in a good mood now, right? He's fallen in love with Juliet. She loves him back. They've made a plan. He's made a plan now where they can get married. He's going to bring his message to the nurse to bring back to Juliet, and so they can get married tonight. And so it's something, he's in a much better mood. And so, of course, you're much more likely to be able to joke around with your friends if you're in a good mood. And so that's what we see here. And then the nurse shows up, and of course, Mercutio makes fun of her because he is a jokester. And so anything that he sees as ridiculous or silly, he's going to make fun of. And the nurse is very ridiculous. And so he makes quite a bit of fun of her, and she gets very offended. And even after Mercutio leaves, she's like, "Who is that man? Why is he so ridiculous?" And Romeo's like, "Oh, don't worry about him." But she just can't sort of let it go because she's so like shaken by his antics. But she, and she does seem a little confused. Romeo's like, "Commend me to your mistress," and she's like, "Okay, goodbye." And he's like, "No, wait, where are you going? I haven't given you my message yet." And so, she's sort of again sort of a ridiculous figure. But he finally does give her the message that Juliet is to go to Friar Lawrence to make confession, right? That's going to be her excuse. She's going to be like, "Oh, well, I'm going to go make confession." But Romeo's going to meet her there. And so after she makes confession, they're going to get married. And then he also tells the nurse to send a servant to pick up a rope ladder, basically, that Romeo's going to send with his servant, that he's going to send his servant with a rope ladder so that that night after they are married, he can climb up into Juliet's window and they can have their wedding night. And so that is the plan so far in Act 2 of Romeo and Juliet. I'll talk to you again later.